Namaskar. A warm welcome to all of you. Today is our final webinar for 2025. Our next session will be on Saturday, 10th January 2026. As the year turn inward. Use this short break to let the Gita's wisdom settle within. Spend a few quiet minutes each morning reflecting and carry that clarity through your day. This inner work will help you step into 2026 lighter, stronger, and truly centered. To stay inspired during the break, join Jayaji's WhatsApp community through the link in the description. I now request Jayaji to continue with chapter 5.
ॐ सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
It's about renunciation in action. Renunciation is not giving up action. It is acting in a spirit of renunciation. So, the chapter starts with the three categories of spiritual aspirants. There are four categories of human beings. The vast majority belong to the bhogi category, means materialistic, outward. They want instant pleasure, they want worldly enjoyments, they want to acquire, aggrandize from the world for themselves. They're selfish. This is the vast majority of human beings. I don't need to describe it I don't need to describe it in detail because we are all familiar with such people. Then comes the minority of people who start looking within, who start thinking that maybe there's something more to life than just enjoyment. So the initial stage of spiritual growth is called the yogi, who have desires. See, the bhogi has a lot of desires and he's constantly accumulating more desires. The yogi also has a lot of desires, but is trying to reduce the number of desires. So he is moving in the opposite direction. Bhogi is moving towards the world, yogi is moving inward. Then he practices karma yoga by and large, and he reduces the number of desires. He becomes a sannyasi. A sannyasi is one who's left with very few desires. Desires to reach the state of realization, desire to serve the world, desire to give back to the guru who has given him so much in life. That's it. He has no other interest in life. And then, so he pursues the path of knowledge, sannyasi. He contemplates, he reflects in his mind. So he's trying to figure things out in his mind. He has no desire to do anything in the world. And as he contemplates further, he meditates, and in the white heat of meditation, the last thought goes, the sannyasi becomes a jnani. Jnani is the man of realization. When I say man, I mean human being. So as you go up from yogi to sannyasi to jnani, the numbers reduce drastically. So in a generation, there might be only one jnani. There will be about 8 or 10 sannyasis. Yogis will be in the thousands. And the rest, billions, are bhogis. Okay, this is the proportion. Then verses 8 to 12, he speaks of the three. Now he's not talking about the bhogi. Yogi, sannyasi, jnani, their relationship with action. How do they relate with action? The jnani is completely objective because he knows I am Atman, I have nothing to do with action. Action goes as per what? Huh? Vasana. So, vasana means ignorance. Vasana manifests as thought in the intellect, desire in the mind, and then fully expresses as action at the body level. Okay? Just as petrol in a car has nothing to do with the performance of the car. It enables the car to function. Without fuel, no car can move. But fuel does not determine the quality of driving. That depends on the engine first and then the driver. So similarly, the quality of action that is performed is not dependent on Atman. A jnani has become Atman. So he says, I have nothing to do with it. Completely 100% objective. He just watches whatever is happening. The quality of action, all actions are empowered by Atman, but the quality of action is dependent on the kind of desire you have. First of all, vasana that you have. Do you all understand what vasana is? Vasana is unmanifest desire. So when you go to sleep, you may have a desire. Let's say you're a musician. You go to sleep with desires for music, right? You wake up, you don't wake up with desire for cricket. What do you wake up with? Desire for music. So while you are asleep, what has happened to your desires? They've gone into the dormant state, unmanifest state. In that state, it is vasana. It's referred to as vasana. Okay? So, quality of action depends on the type of vasana that you have, which manifests as desire and then action. A sannyasi, his only desire in life is to get to realization. He has no other interest in life. Therefore, what does he do? He dedicates all his actions to Brahman, to getting there. Just as a Virat Kohli who is right now playing cricket, his attention is on playing the best cricket he can. He doesn't care whether he is in Ranchi, what kind of hotel he is in, whether the stadium is full or not, whether people in the stadium are for him or against him. He is not bothered with any of that. What is he concerned with? Just his batting. Similarly, a person who is really dedicated to his field, whatever field you are in, you will be at that state. So a sannyasi dedicates his actions to Brahman and does his best. Then you come to yogi, much lower. So yogi has many desires. So what does he do? He acts for self-purification. His focus on Brahman is not that sharp, because that goal is much higher than what he can envisage. Right? So what does he do? It's like us. You may be in the study of the Bhagavad Gita, you might want to follow the spiritual path. What are you doing it for? To become a better human being, right? You may not have the concept of self-realization. That's too far for you. So yogi is like that. His vision is restricted to just becoming a better person. But that's fine. At least he is moving in the right direction. Okay? So these are the three categories and their approach to action. Verses 13 to 15 define a jnani. What makes him tick? How does he interact with the world? Because it's like once you wake up from a dream, so it's like this. Let's say you go to sleep and some stray thought in your mind manifests in the dream, and you dream that it has been announced that you are going to get the Bharat Ratna. Where is all this happening? Dream. So the appointed day comes. Before that, there is a rehearsal, all that you know. The appointed day comes, your name is announced, and you walk up to the President of India to accept your Bharat Ratna award. There are a few steps. And in your excitement, you trip and fall. Where do you fall? In the dream, correct. You're focused. I was expecting someone to say Rashtrapati Bhavan. So you trip, you fall. What happens? You wake up. Now you have to imagine this is not possible. But imagine you are able to go back to the same dream exactly where you left it. Means you've tripped, you've fallen. You get up, again you are back in the dream. What will you say? Will you declare to the president and everyone that this is only a dream? Will you do that? No. What will you do? You will go through the motions as graciously, as gracefully as you can. You're a picture of perfection. You accept the Bharat Ratna, you do whatever you are expected to do, not only when you get the Bharat Ratna, after that also. Then there are huge celebrations, your family, your friends, everybody is excited, except you. You are not excited. Why? Because you know it's a dream. But you go through the motions. They want you to party, you party. They want you to give a speech, you give a speech. Whatever it is that you are expected to do, you do it perfectly, with grace and dignity. But inside you, your internal needle doesn't shift even by 1 degree. Because you know the truth. And what is the truth? That you are the waker and not the dream. This entire dream, including the dreamer, is a projection. It's an illusion. It has no substance. It has no reality. This is how a jnani functions in the world. We are all involved because we don't have knowledge of the fourth plane of consciousness. That's the difference. Then, verses 16 to 21, he gives the pathway to enlightenment. How do you get there? What do you do? And we are on verse 20. Then, see, this chapter connects Karma Yoga action with realization, with meditation and realization, which is chapter 6. So he's leading up to that. He gives the prerequisites to meditation, verses 22 to 26. Meditation is a postgraduate exercise. It's like a PhD. You have to qualify for it. So he gives the qualifications. And then he just introduces the concept of meditation in verses 27 to 29. And this then takes you to the 6th chapter, which is Dhyana Yoga, the yoga of meditation. So someday we'll get there. Now, these 4 categories, Bhogi, Yogi, Sannyasi, Jnani, are presented by Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda's guru, in a very simple manner. See, he lived in a place on the banks of the river Ganga, which was full of fishermen. So he gives an example from what he sees, from what is commonly understood or people relate to. He says, when a fisherman casts his net, there are 4 kinds of fish. One, the wise one, sees the net coming and quickly swims out of reach. So he is never caught. Then the second is a little slow. He gets caught but quickly manages to break free from the net. He is the sannyasi. It's the equivalent of the sannyasi. He gets free. The third gets caught, badly entangled, struggles to break free, but doesn't succeed. And the last, vast majority of fish bite the net and are very comfortable because they're still in the water, oblivious to the fact that few seconds from now they're going to be dead. This is the vast majority of human beings. So, there is the jnani, the person who has realized the self, who's nitya mukta, means ever free. He's never caught in the entanglements of the world, in the attachments of the world. He's always in a realm of his own. Sannyasi struggles to break free from the few attachments that he has and eventually manages to get to the moksha. Yogi is a person who has understood, yes, I am attached, I am entangled, I am dependent on the world, I have my desires for the world, but I need to break free. At least he has the concept that I am caught, I am entangled, and that's not a nice thing to be, and I need to break free. But the worldly people are constantly in the pursuit of more. They want more of everything, and it means so much to them. Right? And they want all these the standards of money and power and position and status. Even if they don't have it, they have to pretend they have it. So you can't afford to buy a Mercedes, but you borrow your brothers or brother-in-laws and run around in it, hoping that other people will think you are a Mercedes fellow. Or you buy a second-hand Mercedes, which will break down any time, but at least for the time being, you're running around in a Mercedes. Things like that. So if marketers and advertisers have found that the guys who are really rich, they don't care. They don't go running after brands, expensive brands. You read about, what is his name? Who? Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett. He lives in a rented house. He drives an ordinary car. He has no desire to show the world anything. You know why? Because he knows he's rich. He knows who he is. He knows how much he's worth. He doesn't care what anybody else thinks about him. The people who buy brands beyond their capacity, you know who they are? They are middle class people who want to show off. So they will buy expensive brands. Now, tell me, you are paying much more, 10, 15 times the price of the handbag or whatever it is that you're buying. Why are you paying that price? Just for the name, the brand. And then the company gets free publicity because your bag has the name of the manufacturer. So you are providing free advertising to the manufacturer after having paid a huge price and a huge premium for it. Does that make sense? Therefore, it is that the really rich do not want a brand name on it, on whatever they buy. Only we idiots do that. So there was a manufacturer of one of these brands in London once who was asked by a journalist, where is your largest market? So he said China and India. Ladies' handbag. So the journalist was surprised and says, how come? He says, that's where all the brainless people live. Because they are buying. See, that is the thing. This is materialism. This springs from a feeling of inadequacy, lack of self-sufficiency, an inferiority complex. People who know who they are, they don't care what other people think. It's not ego or arrogance. They just know. And so what if somebody misunderstands? So what if somebody mistakes you for a poor person? What difference does it make? Like there's a billionaire in America who died. All his life he wore a watch that cost $15 and he was a billionaire. He has donated in his lifetime $8 billion. Watch, $15. I admire him. Warren Buffett said he is his hero. These are the people you should admire. People who don't care, who have no value for a Ferrari car or a, what is it called? Rolls Royce. They'll travel in an ordinary car bus. That's it. They live in a rented house all their lives. Simple furnishing, simple, everything simple. Don't you think that's admirable? It's fantastic. Compared to the people who spend beyond their means. Every month they struggle to meet with their EMIs, to make their payments. Every month they broke. What is the point of living a life like that? And to run after these brands. First of all, in a country like India, where there still are a large percentage of poor people, for you to flaunt your wealth and run around in Mercedes and expensive cars doesn't make sense. Do you know why Indians are hated all over the world now? Because, okay, we are smart, we make money. We do not contribute to the local population. We flaunt our wealth. An Indian wedding means you show off your jewelry, your cars, your this, that. That is why the common people don't like you. Any community that does not blend with the totality will be disliked. Even here, in India, you're flaunting your wealth in front of people who may not be able to afford 2 meals a day. Is that not gross? You want to get married, call 30 people, 100 people, finish it off. Where is the need to do all this? We must learn to be happy with less. Because the more you have, the less you enjoy. So, this is it. Then comes, what is renunciation? Renunciation is not giving up anything. It is moving up to higher enjoyments. It's like, see, physical, you go to a store after class, buy ice cream, eat it. For how long will you enjoy it? As long as there is contact between the ice cream and your taste buds. Moment you swallow it, it's gone. But if you move to the emotional and you buy an ice cream and give it to someone you love, your child, right? The child eats it. He may not even offer you a bite. But you feel so happy that the child has enjoyed the ice cream. And that you can enjoy long after the child has finished eating. Isn't it? That's a totally different enjoyment. Then you move to the intellectual. It's just like a scientist who's trying to discover something important which will help all of humanity. He's indifferent to food. You've heard of that classic, what is it called? Absent-minded professor. There was a case where a scientist had a lab in his own house in the basement. And he had invited some guests over. He forgot he was still in the lab. Wife said, I can't disturb him because he may be in the middle of an important experiment. But we'll have dinner. So the guests and the wife had dinner. And just as they were finishing dinner, the plates they obviously looked as if somebody had eaten. The scientist comes up and sees the guest and said, oh, hello, when did you come? He forgot completely that he had invited them. And then, come, let's have dinner. And he goes to the dining table, sees the plates where food has already been eaten, and he says, oh, what a fool I am. We've already finished dinner. So he's oblivious to whether he's eaten or not. And he forgets his anniversary. Now you can't hang him for that. He's on the threshold of a very important discovery. That's a scientist. And then you go to the spiritual, where we have examples of Nachiketa, this young teenage boy who goes to Lord Yama for Brahma Vidya, for God. And Yama looks at him and says, you're a young boy, why do you want God? I will give you the wealth of earth and heaven. So he turns around disgustedly, he's not interested. Wealth of earth and heaven, mind you. And when he turns around, it seems as if there were heavenly damsels dancing there. So Yama thinks that money doesn't motivate him, maybe this might. So very mischievously he tells him, you can have them too. And disgustedly, he looks at Lord Yama and says, Tavaiva vahastava nritya gite. You keep your song and dance, Yama. Teach me Brahma Vidya. That is the... Now, why does he do that? See, the fact that you refuse something means what? You have your eyes on something much better, right? Isn't it? So, that's it. What has he got his sights on? Infinity. Infinite happiness. Infinite power. Complete independence. When he knows he is heir to that. All of us are heir to that. We don't know it. He knows. Why will he accept even heavenly? Heavenly pleasures, however great they are still finite. So it's your vision. And once you have that vision, once you have that self-confidence that yes, I can do it, then you may not get there, it's okay. But at least you will get to some place. You know, it's like you go to a slum and tell all those guys there, hey, I have the prescription, guaranteed method by which all of you can become millionaires. Are you ready for it? They all say yes. And you give them a method. Work hard, do whatever. Now, all of them may not become millionaires, but at least they'll get out of that filth and the stench and the inconvenience and the discomfort of slum dwelling. He'll come to some sort of decent living, right? In the same way, we are in spiritual slums. And here is Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita offering us what? Infinite happiness. So if you don't have that vision, doesn't matter. At least you go to wherever you can conceive. But at least you'll get out of this horrible condition. What is this horrible condition? Total dependence on the world. If the weather is nice, you're happy. If the weather is not nice, you cannot be happy because you're dependent. If your wife or husband smiles, you're happy. If your partner does not smile, you cannot be happy. What a horrible state of dependence. Now your partner may have a stomachache. How can he smile? That doesn't mean you should also frown. And people's nature varies. There are different people with different kinds of nature. Why should your happiness depend on that? But at this moment, all of us are hopelessly dependent on a million factors. And if even one goes wrong there, you cannot be happy. Isn't that true? So that's the thing. Renunciation is not giving up things that you like. It is moving up to far more fulfilling things. Renunciation is not dispossession. It is all possession. You think something is yours if you've paid for it and there is a sense of ownership. You buy a bicycle, you say, I own the bicycle. You buy a bike, you buy a car, whatever it is, a home. Why should it be like that? So when you have no sense of possessiveness, you drop the sense of possessiveness. What happens? You automatically own the whole world. That is what it is. Renunciation is not life denying. It's not about denying yourself the good things of life. It is life enabling. That you understand life in its totality, not that limited vision of yours. Renunciation is not giving up action. It is giving up the things that come in the way of action. Renunciation is intelligent waste management. In America, people have big homes, big bedrooms, big everything, and big garages. But most often, and they have big cars, expensive cars. Those cars are parked outside because there is no place to bring the car in the garage. You know why? Because it's full of junk. The one thing America doesn't provide is junk disposal. Here you have, what do you call him? What wala? Okay, whatever. Some guy comes and picks up your old newspapers, old stuff. Raddi wala, yeah. I couldn't hear. In America, you don't have. So what happens? The garage is full of stuff that collectively costs maybe $20, while the car that is worth $100,000 is parked outside. Does it make sense? Similarly, friends, we are doing this. Not only physically, mentally, our mind is cluttered with garbage. You know what that garbage is? Petty-mindedness, small-mindedness, negativity, grudges that you hold for years together, lifetime. People say, you know what, I don't talk to my uncle because he scolded me when I was 2 years old. Arey, you don't even remember what happened at 2 years old. All this clutters your mind, as a result of which your mind is not free to think independently, to think creatively, to think brilliantly. So, renunciation is giving up all of this, because it may or may not, it will certainly not do any harm to the other person because they don't know. But it sure as hell kills you because it prevents you from tapping into your potential. It gives you stress. It prevents you from going to sleep. It gives you heart attacks and you suffer. So, all you have to do is understand the spirit of renunciation, and then you transform from mediocrity to excellence, from drudgery to revelry, from indignation to inspiration, and from misery to magic. You wake up in the morning full of life. So, this is the wrong concept we have of spirituality. Who do you think is a spiritual person? Some old man sitting in the Himalayas with a long beard, wearing ochre robes, grunting. That is not a spiritual person. A spiritual person is one who is young, dynamic, full of energy, full of mischief, like Krishna's personality. You just have to listen to Krishna's stories and you get the philosophy. Not for a moment in his entire life did he pull a long face. He always had a smile on his face. And he was full of mischief because he was free from stress. Like children are mischievous because they're free from stress. And they're intelligent. The naughtier the child is, it's a sign of intelligence. If the child is not naughty, is dumb, doesn't have the brains to be naughty. Huh? You see a classroom, you go to any school, you see a class, my God, the children are full of mischief. Every minute they're up to some mischief. The teachers are pulling their hair in frustration. But a true teacher is one who understands. And she allows the youthful spirit and the dynamism and the mischief of the children to come to her. That's why you see often good teachers are always young at heart, because that youthfulness they get from the kids. It's such a pleasure to be with kids because of this. And a spiritual person retains this all his life, even at 100 years or 90, he's still full of mischief and cheer. So, this is it. Continue with verse 20.
न प्रहृष्येत् प्रियं प्राप्य नोद्विजेत् प्राप्य चाप्रियम् स्थिरबुद्धिरसम्मूढः ब्रह्मविद् ब्रह्मणि स्थितः.
Resting in Brahman with steady intellect, undeluded, the knower of Brahman does not rejoice with the pleasant nor grieve over the unpleasant. So, the first step to becoming spiritual is to understand that the world is a mix of pairs of opposites. Profit and loss, pleasure and pain, honor and dishonor. This mix is part and parcel of life. This is the uniqueness of life. This is the beauty of life. See, it's like this. If you're a player in the stock market, How do you make money? Well, obviously, nobody here is. How do you make money? When the stock market fluctuates, you make money, right? Huh? So there has to be a dip and then there has to be a rise. If the stock market was steady, it doesn't change only, what do you say? It's boring. I can't make money. You know, there was a function at which, yeah, Forex Association of India, foreign exchange agents from all over the country, they had a conference in Goa and they invited me to speak there, but they had invited the Reserve Bank governor as their chief guest. So their main complaint to the Reserve Bank governor is the rupee is not fluctuating. How can we make money? You see? So in the world is not like that. It's constantly fluctuating. So every day there is a surprise in the world, something with the other. Like a few days back, you woke up and there was a nip in the air. Mumbai and pleasant. How nice. And then today you woke up, it's hot again. So once you understand that this is the world, you'll have to learn the art of adjusting to the fluctuations of the world. And then you're happy. Right? So that's what he's saying here. The first step is to be neutral to priyam and apriyam. Priyam, pleasant, apriyam, unpleasant. You can't say that, oh, I love only sweet things and I don't like bitter things. Right? The unfortunate part is that which is bitter is good for you and that which is sweet is not good for you. So you have to learn to balance. That's why, is there anyone Bengali here? You know, when Bengalis eat, they don't eat like us, everything together. They have courses. First course is bitter. What is it called? Shukti. Shukto. Huh? So the first dish is bitter. So you have that. Then after that comes a vegetable. And then all spinach and all these things that generally people don't like. And then in the middle of the meal, after the middle of the meal, all the good stuff starts coming. Good means tasty. Fried, this, that, chatpata stuff starts coming. So why they do that is because unless you eat the first few steps, you don't get the rest. So life is like that. Unless you learn the art of dealing with that which is not that pleasant, which is bitter, which is frustrating, only then you can appreciate the good things of life. So be neutral. How? Grow to the high. It's like this. Let's say you are a full-grown adult and you're babysitting your niece or nephew or something like that, a child. So you say, okay, what do we do? Let's play a game of chess or Monopoly or whatever it is. You're playing a game with a child. And you play with the same enthusiasm, the same vigor, the dynamism as the child. But there is a big difference between you and the child. What's the difference? The child is affected by winning or losing. You are not affected. You are playing to give pleasure to the child. Why are you not affected? Because you are resting on higher things. Let's say you're playing Monopoly. You know, in Monopoly you buy and sell real estate. You don't care about Monopoly money because you are dealing in real estate. That is the difference. When you grow to a higher level, you understand the fluctuations of the lower don't affect. It's like an actor on stage, you know. In any play or a movie, the hero, the chief actor, usually gets the role of a pauper. He's poor or he's going through some challenges. Huh? And the worst actor is made the king or a rich guy because he doesn't have much to perform. But the poverty of the role has no effect on the finances of the actor. The poorer the role, the richer is the actor. No? So, similarly, when you understand that I am playing different roles, doesn't matter what role. See, the chairman of a company may play a cricket game with another company, and the captain of his team is a person very junior to him. He is the chairman, is a useless player, so he is a 12th man. Chairman of a company goes out, takes drinks, water to the others. Now he can't say, what the hell, I'm the chairman. I have to be the opening batsman, then finish. The team loses. So that's the thing. You play different roles. The chairman of a company may be the boss in his office, but in his house he is a total slave. Who's the boss? Wife, correct. You got it. You just have to understand these are the various roles I'm playing. Play your role. Finish. That's it. That's why Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage and all men and women are players. They have their exits and their entrances. If you understand this, you've got it. Go home today and between today and next week, just remind yourself, I'm just playing a role. So if the wife bullies you, don't get upset, just understand the role. I'm getting paid. The more I take the bullying, the happier I'll be. That's all there is. So, don't jump with joy, don't sink with sorrow. That's a very, very immature. So, that's what it is. And how do you get that? Equanimity of mind, sthira buddhi, your intellect becomes steady. And asammudha, you're undeluded. So today you're deluded by all kinds of things. You believe that happiness is out there in the world. Total delusion. So only, how do you get there? Only when you're established in the higher values does your intellect become steady and you become undeluded. So Buddha reached that state of, there are two fantastic words, concepts in Vedanta, where when you give your best, when you do your best, doesn't matter what the result is. You know you've done your best. You've put in the hard work. You've done your best. You get the feeling of krita kritya, means what had to be done has been done. And you get this tremendous sense of quiet satisfaction. It's not that you're jumping with joy. Like a cricket World Cup when they won, they were jumping 10 feet high. It's not that. Krita kritya, quiet sense of satisfaction. I can't tell you what it is, but you must experience it. And you can experience it only when you've done your absolute best. Nobody might even know what you've done. It's like a lady who cooks for the family with her heart and soul. It doesn't matter, the family doesn't even recognize, doesn't appreciate. It's okay. And kritartha, you get this sense of fulfillment. And that can be with making a cup of tea, it could be with great oratory, I don't know. It doesn't have to be a great thing. And then in the last stages of meditation, the meditation is a flow of thought. Last stage, when you're deep in meditation, you stop the chant. And when you stop the chant, there's complete silence. Thoughts are gone, mind is extinct. So far, the intellect was discriminating. The job of the intellect is to discriminate. Discriminating between sound and silence. Not that you're saying it aloud, in your mind. Thought, silence. Suddenly, thought gone. Intellect is perplexed. What do I discriminate? Intellect is jobless, intellect goes. When mind and intellect goes, what remains is Atman. You have become God. What a fabulous train of thought. Where you start from Arjuna's condition. You're confused, you're heartbroken, you're in tears. Gandiva slips from your hand, means you're dysfunctional, agitated. From there, you have reached this stage of the last state of meditation. What a concept. Then you become Brahmavid, knower of Brahman. Brahmani sthitaha, you become established in Brahman. You have done what you were born to do. You may never get there, but just this thought, does it not give you peace? Just the thought that you are thoughtless. Fantastic concept. Next verse, please, 21.
बाह्यस्पर्शेष्वसक्तात्मा विन्दत्यात्मनि यत्सुखम् स ब्रह्मयोगयुक्तात्मा सुखमक्षयमश्नुते.
One not attached to external contacts finds happiness in the self. One united to Brahman by yoga obtains undecaying happiness. So he says, Bahya sparsha, contact. Sparsha is touch with external. There are 5 senses, right? Eyes, ears, nose, tongue and skin. Out of the 5, sparsha, touch, is the most tangible. And that is the one that gives you comfort right from the day you're born. The mother's touch is what gives the baby, the infant, comfort. But it's the grossest. But that touch lends reality. When you touch something, you know it's there. It's real for you. The mother's touch for the baby, so on and so forth. But then you grow out of it. You must grow because it's only a fraction of what joy you are heir to. So the 5 are Shabda, word, sound. Sparsha, touch with the skin. Rupa, form, you see, sight with your eyes. Rasa is taste with your tongue. And Gandha is smell with the nose. So he's saying one who is attached to these, through these 5 sense organs, one who is not attached to these 5 sensory contact finds happiness in the self. So you move. So what happens is, as long as you're outward looking and you're dependent on sense contact, you are an extroverted person. Your enjoyment of life is limited to only sense contact. The moment you look inward, you find happiness, peace, and we reach the ultimate, united to self, you find infinite bliss. So there are 3 types of joy that we are heir to, that we can experience. One is called Vishayananda, which is contact with senses, with the body. The second is called Bhajanananda, is not bhajans, it is emotional and intellectual joys, with the mind and intellect. And the third is Brahmananda, the bliss of contact with self, which is self-realization, spirit. So, like William Blake said, he who bends to himself a joy doth the winged life destroy. But he who kisses a joy as it passes lives in eternity's sunrise. What a beautiful concept, you know. You don't have to grab a thing, you don't have to own a thing, you don't have to crush it and kill it. Just enjoy it. It comes, enjoy it, let it go. Do we do that? No. We want to grab, we want our proprietorship on it. And that destroys it. And this is true even of relationships. You have a relationship, you let go of the person. Let go doesn't mean physically, please. Because then you'll pounce on me. How to let go? It's about giving the freedom to the other person to live the way he or she wants, including children. If the child does not want to study, you don't accept it. No, you must. And you would rather destroy the child and the child's self-confidence than accept that this is the way the child is. There are many children who are smart enough, but they just don't have a desire to get 99%. How can you force? How will you feel if somebody forces you and you're not earning enough money? You must earn more. Right? This is what you're capable of. This is what you'll do. Right? This is how you kill relationships. Next verse, 22.
ये हि संस्पर्शजा भोगाः दुःखयोनय एव ते आद्यन्तवन्तः कौन्तेय न तेषु रमते बुधः.
O Kaunteya, son of Kunti, very lovingly he addresses Arjuna as Kaunteya because he has immense respect and love for Kunti. He considers Kunti as his mother. So Arjuna, when he says Kaunteya, it's like saying, you're my brother, Arjuna. Contact-born pleasures are only wombs of sorrow. They have a beginning and an end. The wise one does not delight in them. What a verse. So with this verse, we start the prerequisites to meditation, verses 22 to 26. So what he's talking about, he's pointing out to two different kinds of happiness. One is, technically it's called Rajasic happiness, means it's contact born with your sense organs. It gives you pleasure in the beginning, no doubt. Instant pleasure it gives you. But it gives you pain, everlasting pain. Whereas, so then the thing is, therefore he says wombs of sorrow. You know, womb is that which not only gives once, again and again. That is the nature of instant pleasure. And look at where we are going in the world. First, we had to go and buy whatever we wanted, right? Then we got delivery at home. That could take days. Then it said, what, 20 minutes or 10 minutes? 10 minutes, blink it, 10 minutes. So whatever you want is available to you in 10 minutes. That is, just remove the joy that you had of anticipation. In the old days, you had to plan, you had to anticipate, and then finally go and get it. So it enhanced your joy of everything. Now it just comes to you. Before you know you want it, it's there. So it's taken away the joy. Even relationships, they you needed to build a relationship, you needed to invest in it, you had to go through that uncertainty. Well, I don't know whether the person is interested in me or not. Now there's no such thing. What is it? The dating apps. Huh? Yeah. Swipe right, you get a date. That's why I want young people around me to know what the trends are. And swipe left, what happens? You just, friends, you can't swipe right for happiness. You can swipe right for a date. You can swipe right for Dettol. But happiness you can't swipe. You got to work toward it. So that is sattvic happiness or true happiness. May be painful in the beginning, is painful in the beginning. But it gives you everlasting happiness. Which student likes to study? You teach students. Nobody, correct. But if they don't study, they don't have a future. Which guy wants to work 16 hours a day, 18 hours a day? Nobody likes to work. But you look at all the successful people, they work. So whether they are lawyers or engineers or chartered accountants or whatever it is, unless you put in that hard work, or athletes. Today there was a discussion on what has made Virat Kohli at 37. At 37 in a sport you retire. Hit 2 centuries back to back, right? Look at the level. So for that, you have to have a level of fitness, first of all. You have to be out there practicing. So he can't eat what he wants, he can't sleep whenever he wants. He can't do a million things that he wants to do. But unless he does that, he doesn't get this. The adoration of millions of people, money of course, I don't know, how can you describe this kind of hero worship? So everybody has done this. Sachin Tendulkar has done the same thing. This guy, the swimmer, Michael Phelps, who's won the maximum number of awards, was asked once, how do you do it, man? Very casually sitting there, just practice. Just practice means what? Whether it's Christmas, New Year, Easter, American Independence Day, whether I have fever, I'm not well, blood pressure, every day, wake up in the morning, jump into the pool, that's it. That frightening consistency is what these people have, which we don't have. We don't have because we have no commitment to the goal. You have to have a goal and you have to be committed to the goal. Anybody, even a homemaker, all that you're doing is looking after the home, but that's a lot. And I've been to homes where every single item is in the right place. You enter the house, you get stunned. I must confess, I'm nowhere near it. But there are people like that. There are people who cook, every single item they cook is par excellence. There are athletes, there are swimmers, to achieve that kind of excellence, you have to pay the price. Nothing comes for free. And I'm talking to the wrong people. I should be talking to young people. The young people today, they want instant. Startups, 300 million just like that. No, it doesn't happen. And if it happens, you're going to lose it fast. Just as fast as you made it. Keep your nose to the grinding wheel and just keep on at it. And you'll achieve. Whether it's self-realization, spiritual evolution, or excellence in the world. This is one quality the West has which we don't have. Thomas Edison failed 32 times. And he told himself, I didn't fail 32 times. I discovered 32 ways in which it is not possible to make an electric bulb. But after that, he succeeded. Amazing. So he refers to sense contact as wounds of sorrow because it's unending. It is never that you are satisfied. Huh? You like cake. You have 3 slices of cake. Are you going to be happy? No, you want the 4th and the 20th. Unending. And the double whammy is it has diminishing returns. Every contact, every succeeding contact that you make with the same object, the joy content diminishes until it reaches a state where having it, there's zero joy. Then why do you keep having? Because if you don't have it, it gives you sorrow. And it has a beginning and an end. The wise do not delight in. And we are all delighting in them, which means what? We are all, let's putting it mildly. Correct. Vimudha. Mudha means fools. Vimudha means super fools. We don't learn even from experience. So that is the thing. Swami Ramatirtha, who didn't mince words, he just said the truth. He said, you quote anything other than Atman and you will be visited by sorrow. You will get sorrow. There's no doubt about it, 100%. Why are we all getting sorrow? Because we are all quoting anything, everything except Atman. Atman means what? Spirituality. So, it's not about giving up other things, please. Don't get scared. Continue what you're doing. Do more. But never forget this. You keep telling yourself, I am not who I believe myself to be. I am not this limited, stupid individual. I am something else altogether. And my mission in life is to discover that. I'm going to leave you with a story. Because however much I speak, you'll remember only the stories. There's a movie called Random Harvest. It's an old black and white movie. It's about a young man who goes to war during the World War, gets injured and he gets hit on the head, I think, and he loses his memory. He doesn't know who he is. Can you imagine such a frightening thing? So he's waiting in the hospital for someone to come and say, this is my son, or this is my brother, or something. Nobody comes. And every time they have a visitor, and he goes back so disappointed. In the meanwhile, there's a nurse in the hospital who makes friends with him. And they fall in love, they get married, they have a child. And one day he has to go to work, for a job interview somewhere. And he has to go to another city. When he goes to that city, he has an accident again. And this time, he remembers his earlier life and he forgets it's 7 years. Forgets what happens in these 7 years. So, in England, it's based in England, just as in India, I think, the law is that if you're missing for 7 years, you are deemed dead. And your assets are distributed among the survivors. So, he goes back home. And apparently he is the son of a rich lord. And he walks into the dining room. And his sisters and their husbands are all there. They have just popped champagne and they're about to celebrate what? The money that they're getting, their inheritance. When he walks in, and it's so funny, you should see the expression on their faces. They don't know whether to be disappointed that they've lost their inheritance or be happy that they've got their brother back. Anyway, he goes back and he learns the strings again and he becomes an excellent manager. But he's consumed with the fact that where was I these last 7 years? How come I don't remember? It's as if 7 years of my life have been written out. The only clue he has is his house key. So every now and then he pulls the key from his pocket and stares at it. In the meanwhile, his wife is looking for him. Nowhere to be found. She finally traces him and then goes to a psychiatrist and says, what do I do? He says, if you go to him and show him all the proof, you have enough proof that you are his wife and so on and so forth, he will accept you as a wife, but he won't love you the way he did. So you have to help him regain his memory. And she takes a job as his secretary. So she's so close to him and yet so far apart. He then, because everyone is after him to get married, he's a young, handsome man. He has a sham wedding with his secretary, who's actually his wife. And he tells her that, look, for the world we are married. When we go back home, you go to your room, I go to mine. So she says, okay. And this is it. Then finally, he realizes in one of his factories there's a strike and he wants to go and talk to those guys who are on strike in Liverpool. He goes there and he wants a cigarette. So he asks his manager, do you have a cigarette? He said, no. And he turns a few corners to a cigarette shop and he buys a cigarette. His manager comes and says, have you been here before? He says, no. How did you know that there was a cigarette shop here? That sparks him. Now he knows. So he finds his way to his home and he has the key and that wicket gate makes a peculiar sound. Then everything comes back to him. Now, why am I telling you this story? We are like that man in Random Harvest. We just don't know who we are. But unlike him, we have forgotten and we are indulging in what there is. But we must be like him. And the key that he brings out every now and then is the conscience. It is the key to finding ourselves. If you pursue, you will find, like he found. And then everything falls in place. His earlier life, his wealth, his status, his latter life, his wife, child, everything comes together. And when we find ourselves, everything will come together.